Thank you, Steve. Right, I think we'll make a start. Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome the public and the press. We are actually going to move item 6 in front of after the NHS winter readiness. Could I have any declarations of interest, please?
Yep.
None? Yes?
Just as a non-pecuniary interest on item 6 as a freight customer of the steamship company.
I think that's actually all of us. I don't think that is. Don't think that's necessary.
Chairman, items.
May I come in?
Yes, sorry, Matt, I didn't see you up there. Sorry, welcome.
Oh, I'm in the way. Small chap. So I agree because everyone on the island effectively is a freight customer, and so I don't think any of you, particularly unless you have large shareholdings in the freight companies, have interests to declare. So you're all good to stay and be part of the debate and vote.
Thank you very much, Matt. Thank you. Could we have to look at the draft minutes? Has anybody got any anything to bring up about the minutes? No? Could we have a proposer, please?
I propose them as an accurate reflection of the meeting.
Thank you very much. Seconder. Thank you, Councillor Watt. And all those in favour? Thank you. Urgent items. I have one urgent item. You just bear with me. After our... sorry, I just have to... I did have it ready, but it's gone. Can't find it now. Where is it? Yes, here we are. After our last meeting on the 23rd of October, and after some report in the Cornishman, I have had a letter from Dr. Pickin, which I'd like to read to you. Dear Councillor Mumford, I was disappointed to read the comments reported in the local press from Councillor Davis regarding the provision of healthcare services on the Isles of Scilly to the Scrutiny Committee on the 23rd of October. Councillor Davis has described the local general practice service as bad medicine and expensive medicine to put someone in a helicopter and passing the buck elsewhere, and also described it as not necessarily the best way to treat patients either. Please could Councillor Davis provide his evidence to this statement? This is without any factual basis. Quoting helicopters flying with patients as a measure of medical care standards has no correlation with any aspect of healthcare standards and does not reflect any external assurance assessment we have been involved with. We have been and remain CQC outstanding. As a highly experienced group of clinicians, we are always committed to providing the highest standards of care for our patients. No doctor, nurse, or allied health professional is guilty of passing the buck when planning or delivering patient care. I would be grateful if the councillor could evidence why he has forwarded this opinion. I am concerned these comments have been accepted by the Scrutiny Committee without question. Councillor Davies's opinions do not appear to be representative of the wider public view of the healthcare we provide. As you are aware, we were nominated by our local community for the GP Awards Practice of the Year. I would be delighted to offer the Scrutiny Committee the comments received by our local residents relating to this. Should the Scrutiny Committee have any ongoing concerns, I would be more than happy to discuss these and would assure the committee that Scilly clinicians remain very much involved in the governance of medical services on these islands. I look forward to the committee's reply. We have replied to Dr. Pickin, and we have sent an email to Councillor Davies, which I will read to you. Dear Adrian, following our Scrutiny Committee meeting on the 23rd of October, a number of issues have been raised following publication of your views in the Cornishman. Requests have been made to provide evidence in support of your statement, although I appreciate you have other things on your mind. I would be most grateful if you could provide a written response. Some criticism has also been directed to the committee, and I am dealing with this. 1. Please could Councillor Davies provide his evidence for the following. Councillor Davies described the local general practice service as bad medicine and expensive medicine, to put someone in a helicopter and passing the buck elsewhere, and also described it as not necessarily the best way to treat patients either. 2. I would be grateful if the councillor could evidence his opinion that any doctor, nurse or allied health professional is guilty of passing the buck when planning or delivering patient care. Please could I have your response by the middle of December? Best wishes. That's sent for me. I haven't heard back, so we will wait and see if we get a reply, and I will inform you all if there's a reply. Right, we now go on to item 4. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Sorry, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. Just for the record, I think I'll speak for most people around the table and say, you know, we are fully in support of our excellent health service here, and very much support Chris Pickin in saying that it's, you know, an outstanding rating health centre, and we're very proud of our services here, I think.
Thank you. Jane.
Can I add that Healthwatch, as you all know, does a biennial household survey, and one of the sections on that is on the local GP practice, and all I can say is it is consistently given us very, very good feedback from the people that reply, and we get a pretty good response rate. And certainly, you know, I would go along with what Councillor Smith has said. And I think, you know, if we didn't say anything at the last meeting, I think it may have been that we were a bit stunned by some of the comments ourselves.
Yes, in hindsight, I should have actually, yeah, his statement was, or his views strayed into what, you know, we were talking about adult social care really in the community. And in hindsight, perhaps I should have said something to admit that. Okay. Agenda item 4, the NHS system winter readiness.
Hello, that's me.
Yes.
Rachel.
Well,
can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, welcome, Rachel.
Hello. For those who don't know me, I'm Rachel Murray. I'm the County Development Manager for NHS Careload, and I cover West Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. I need to first of all give apologies from Karen Kay, who is the lead director for the system winter plan. She's on leave and away on leave, not just sitting at home drinking tea, she would otherwise obviously be here. And I need to massively caveat what I'm going to present with the fact that this is not something that I've authored or been particularly involved in. I have been briefed, I've been briefly briefed by Karen, so I will do my very best. I won't pretend to know things that I don't know, and I will take back any comments or questions that you have that I can't answer. So if you'll bear with me on that basis, then I'll do my very best for you to make sense of this and to open the discussion. So members have in front of them obviously the cover report and two appendices. Appendix A is our sort of version of the cover report that Karen wrote, so it doesn't really add a lot more detail. Appendix B is the narrative version of the winter plan, and that's the 20-something, 29-page document. That's the narrative version of the plan. So the system is required by NHS England to produce this thing called the winter plan. And I think it's important to make a distinction between the winter plan, which is this document, and the winter planning process, which is something that is actually ongoing. And I guess you could say it's never complete because it's about system resilience. And that is something that we need not just for winter, but for all times of the year, because there are pressure points at all times of the year. The process is the planning process is owned by the A&E Delivery Board, and the person who chairs that is Kate Shields, who's also obviously the Chief Executive Officer for Royal Cornwall Hospitals Trust. The lead director is Karen Kay. So the recommendations before you with these papers are to identify any Arthur-Scilly specific risks and to continue to be part of the planning process. So the winter plan doesn't replace any individual organisational, operational resilience plans. It's a system level look at what we've learned from last year and what we can improve. You'll notice immediately, I'm sure, that there isn't much locality level detail, so there isn't much Arthur-Scilly specific detail nor any other locality specific detail. But the planning process is starting to have that conversation out in communities. That's one of the things that's noted, that it needs to be a more ground up process in the future. So an example of that, in fact, is the workshops that were held early in November in the Arthur-Scilly to develop the model of care. So that's the sort of very local ground-up discussion about how we look after people that's starting to happen now around the rest of the county. And it happened first in the Arthur-Scilly, and then similar workshops are happening now in Helston and on other parts of the mainland. And there are further conversations along those lines planned for January on the Arthur-Scilly. So it is moving towards a more ground-up approach, learning from last winter. So just to say a bit more about the planning process. So it's based on and lessons learned from last year around the need for system-wide ownership. No sort of buck passing from organisation to organisation, but realising that this is an entire system issue. It looks at quantifying specific risks and putting mitigation against those specific risks. And that's based on some demand and capacity modelling around bed capacity and other things. And there was an effort to convey these in a way that feels real and tangible. For example, there's a mention of the capacity being equivalent to the need to reduce length of stay by half a day every day intra-lit. So if we were able to do that, then we wouldn't have a 64-bed capacity issue. Or the equivalent would be reducing 8 to 12 admissions to hospital every day across the whole county. So you can start to see for the Arthur-Scilly part of that, we're talking about relatively small numbers. So it should feel like something that is achievable across the system. There are some specifics that we are putting in there's mention in the documents of a plan on the page, and then there's will have been sent a draft slide set, which includes a slide on the Isles of Scilly. So one of the things, well, there's a couple of things actually that I wanted to mention that will appear in there. So on the back of the workshops that happened in early November, there's a small integration group that's already started to meet and to be established that meets weekly. Another action has been that we are looking into a patient flow coordinator based at Wesleyan Hospital, who will be able to keep a daily tally of people from the Isles of Scilly to look at incidents where people are getting stuck or where their transfers and movement through the system could be handled better. And that's something that's underway at the moment. I was asked to say something about the planned fire remedial works at St Mary's Hospital. So they were due to, well, they did start in November, on the 5th of November, and they're expected to be completed by mid-January. Phase 1 has been, or should be by now, completed, and that involved the maternity unit and inpatient bed area and MIU. Phase 2 started at the end of November and included some bed closures. Phase 3 should begin on the 17th of December and is expected to be completed mid-January. And 8 beds will remain open at this time. And the MIU department will work from a different area in the hospital for that period. All beds will be available during the Christmas break. Dental services will continue as normal. Clinics and X-ray will have a minimum disruption, and the kitchen will be kept in use at all times. So that reflects a conversation that was had between multiple agencies to minimise any impact that some closures around the hospital might have, particularly as we move into the winter period. And the other thing that we'll hear in that slide is about winter pressures funds that have been invested into intermediate care beds in Park House. So I think what we would like to know from you is what's missing from what you've already seen and what's emerging in that draft slide set. What are the specific risks, and then what is the specific mitigation against those risks for the Isles of Scilly? And also just to sort of put a challenge out to all of us really about, with regard to the media pack that you've also had, what can we do to promote winter wellbeing and resilience for ourselves and our family and our community? That's something that we can all do. And what are the particular issues and advantages that you have in this small island community? So I think I'll just pause there for a moment, as no doubt we have questions or comments, so I'm sure Della to answer.
Thank you very much, Rachel. I'll just start off. I think one of our main worries here is post-discharge support. When a patient is discharged and the patient doesn't know where to go, or if they're discharged at 6 o'clock or 8 o'clock in the evening, it can be quite traumatic for a patient if they haven't got friends or family with them. And I was wondering whether in every ward at the hospital there could be a sort of plan put up so the nurses and everybody who works on that ward knows exactly what to do with Isles of Scilly patients, because it is quite a problem sometimes. Could you comment, please?
I think that's a really good idea. I think at the start of that, and I'm trying to define the extent of that issue, is this patient flow coordinator having more of a view to patients from the Isles of Scilly. But yeah, that sounds like a very sensible idea to me, and I'm happy to take that back. And I think we would need help in describing what the plan is.
Thank you very much. Anybody got any questions? Councillor Watt.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Could I just endorse what you just said? In fact, I've highlighted it on paragraph 3 of the cover report. I mean, I would argue that this is probably the most important point in the whole report regarding Scilly. And but there's very little, in fact, nothing at all, as far as I can see, in the subsequent report. And I refer to page 17, paragraph 13, which is patient movement, I believe, and nothing about Scilly. I did take the point that Rachel made, though, that there could be a further report on the way, and also that this report is actually work in progress.
Thank you. Have you any comment, Rachel?
Yeah, I read, as I said, when I was looking through it, it reads, it is a high level report. You know, thinking about the other areas that I look after, yeah, the depths of the lizard and, you know, Cape Cornwall, there are similar issues that they are facing, and I think they would expect to see something more tangible and more specific to them, which I know is on the way, but I would welcome any help input that you could give on that.
Jane.
Thank you, Chairman. Jane Hurd, Health Watch. Hello, Rachel.
Hi.
On page 12 of your report on this, I think it's what Councillor Watt was talking about, reducing length of stay, stranded patients, delayed transfer of care. It doesn't actually address Scilly's specific problems, because the difference between us and the lizard or wherever that you just mentioned is that here, having difficulties with accessing and coming home from medical care, anyone on the lizard can actually get home that evening, whereas we're in a position, if the weather's bad and there's no flying, where do we go? And the fact that vulnerable people are leaving the hospital and being left to fend for themselves in bed and breakfast overnight that they've got to find is not conducive to good patient care, I'm afraid. And we've had this over and over again at Health Watch. If they're unable to return because there's no flying, what we need is somewhere where they can stay that's secure and with, shall we say, with some support if necessary.
Yeah, I completely agree. I completely agree. I've heard that loud and clear, and I'll absolutely think that back. Yes, thank you.
I also think that perhaps when a patient is taken into hospital from the Isles of Scilly, especially in an emergency, perhaps they could be given a leaflet to reassure them what to do when they're discharged or who to go to. I think it's lack of communication, actually, probably with the nursing staff, with patient transport. But I just feel that if the patients are actually given something that they can read, and the nurses have got something they can read, that should cover it.
I think there was something, but maybe I'm mistaken about that. Another eminently sensible and achievable suggestion. Yes, thank you. I think that would be fantastic. And perhaps Jane could help us put something together.
Yes, yes, we'd be happy to do that. We did at one time have a card, didn't we? But it seems to have disappeared off the face of the earth.
I thought we did. Yeah, I thought we did.
But can I add on to what the Chairman's just said? Quite often, and we've had cases of this, people who are taken away as an emergency go away without any change of clothes, without any money, and without any support. And I think that is a point that really does need addressing, because there's not a lot of support in those circumstances at present.
Yeah. There needs to be an overall plan B, doesn't there?
Yeah.
That's a very pragmatic issue, such as, yes, clothing, someone to stay, someone to help. Yeah, I get that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. I completely endorse what's been said, especially what Jane said around people going away and not necessarily having any support at all. And I know that from personal experience. Also, just pick up on the kind of other end of the sort of planning spectrum in terms of when people are scheduled for operations. I'd heard of a case recently where a man from St Mary's had been waiting a year for an operation. Then he was given a date on the 20th of December, and he's likely to stay in for 2, 3, perhaps more days and could have missed Christmas at home. And those sorts of things, you know, I think that needs to be fed into the system a bit, and just a bit of awareness about what it means to come from the Scilly to go for scheduled operations.
I know there was some work done about that recently, wasn't there? And the booking teams have information about how long journey times are and the window of opportunity for an equipment to actually happen in order to be able to return home. But certainly, yeah, that needs to be reiterated and emphasised after this, I agree, yeah.
Okay. Just 2 more points here. Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, it's Harry Legg from Medical Travel and Transport Group, just joining in on that point. It's often found that people have 2 scheduled appointments that could be done at the same time, but they are told that there is no way to arrange them at the same time. I would have thought it could save the NHS time and money if a little effort was made for patients from the Isles of Scilly to have appointments scheduled within the same block, as opposed to 3-4 days apart.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Councillor Smith.
It seems that so much could be accomplished by having a central point of coordination that's specific to the Isles of Scilly. So perhaps the patient flow role was a start of that, but yeah, it needs further community, doesn't it, as a dedicated resource.
Councillor Smith.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Just to pick up on a couple of points on page 14 of that. Well, it's page 6 of your report and page 14 of our agenda. There's 2 figures there, figure 2 and figure 3, looking at the emergency arrivals and the sort of bed demand. I mean, there's clearly very significant increases in both in recent years. And I wonder if you could just sort of flesh that out a bit more as to the reasons for that. I mean, to be honest, it looks pretty concerning, and I'm sure it's a big issue for you in the NHS.
Gosh, I think from my knowledge why that would be, I think the main reason would be the increase in population, particularly in the over 80s population. I think because people are living longer but with more complications, that means that the rise in demand is going up all the time, and I would think that that's why you're seeing those figures. But I can get a more detailed and less waffly analysis if you'd like me to.
Well, I think it'd certainly be interesting to understand that. As I say, it's certainly a concern, I would have thought.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else got any questions? Thank you very much, Rachel, for that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Right, so we just go through the recommendations then, that members review and comment on the adequacy of the winter planning process and winter plan itself, that members identify if there are any additional risks and issues specific to the Isles of Scilly which have not yet been addressed by the winter plan. I would like to put post-discharge support in there somewhere, so it's highlighted, please. Could I have a...
I think if Rachel can email maybe you, Chairman, with some answers to the questions that have been posed, and then you can circulate those around to members afterwards.
Yes, could you do that, Rachel? Thank you.
Absolutely, yeah, I'd be very happy to do that. I think you need to have responses back.
Yes. We were hoping to have Dr. Picken here, but he had to work because one of the doctors was stuck on the mainland. So,
okay. Yes, I shall get the responses back to you. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. There is a. Bob, would you like to read that out?
Just briefly, thank you very much, Rachel. It's really useful for coming. I've just had an email this morning from Dr. Picken, who was hoping to come down if he could. In relation to the hospital, I think that summary was really useful. And Dr. Picken would like to reassure people that although there's still a risk around the reduced number of beds, the practice and Cornwall Partnership NHS Foundation Trust are actively working with them to make sure the situation is effectively managed. He's also just provided, from a local perspective, the practice, basically his comment is we're just about as ready for winter as possible on the islands. All flu vaccines have been delivered. All patients with chronic health needs and care planning have been reviewed, along with the community hospital, the ambulance service and public health, Park House, and also contingency planning has been put in place, along with the community nursing teams to try to deliver care in home where possible to try to minimise impact to community hospital, given bed reduction. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Do we have to do it? Yeah, could we have a proposer for the recommendations 1 and 2 together?
Yeah, I'll propose that, Chairman.
Thank you. Seconded. Councillor Sims. All those in favour? Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time, Rachel.
Thank you.
I'm sure it's precious. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Right. Agenda item. What are we on now? Lost my agenda. 6, please. Yes, agenda item 6 now. That's the freight scrutiny. I would like to call Andrew May, Chairman of the Steamship Company, and Stuart Reid. I'm not quite sure of your proper title, Stuart. Acting Managing Director. Thank you. To the table. First of all, I'd like to welcome you both to this item, and I would like to ask Bob to introduce the report first, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I'd like to just lead off with an apology from myself. This is in relation to the number of late papers, so this does affect not just members, but external partners, press and the public. It was raised by yourself, Chair, as a priority at the previous meeting, and since we've identified where one of the main issues is around the lateness of these papers, so acting on having a much more effective timetable in future. Moving on to the report, the main focus of this is the survey that was carried out in the spring. So the kind of results of the survey in terms of numbers of responses are presented in the appendix. The report itself looks at the kind of how that fits into the scope of the scrutiny review and is where any kind of analysis of those survey data were carried out. The sample sizes involved really didn't allow any particularly sophisticated statistical analysis, but there is some in there. More than happy to go through those with anybody if they wish to at a future date. I'll take the report as read, despite the lateness. I appreciate there's quite a long report, and there, I think, was only one, when I was reading it last night, there was one error, and that was on top of page 10 of the report. This referred to the food and drink businesses replying to the survey. It states that they were particularly responsive, which is true in relation to their proportion on the NNDR kind of business rates database that the council holds. It says there are relatively low levels of satisfaction. That is borne out by the graphs, but there is not the evidence that supports also relatively low levels of experience of change. So I struck that out of my copy last night. So there are relatively low levels of satisfaction for that sector, but not relatively low levels of experience of change, the kind of perception of improvement. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I'd like to invite representatives of the Isles of Scilly Steamship Company to comment on the report's findings and the 6 questions on page 56 of the agenda and page 18 of the report.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Obviously, the survey was delivered to us over the last couple of days, so we've taken some time to read through that. As I asked Bob this morning, it would be very helpful for us as well to go through that in some detail at a later date to sort of really get down into the numbers and identify some of these trends which have been identified. In terms of comments on the actual freight survey, as highlighted on page 10, there were obviously a small number of responses, 75 in total, and the author actually states in there that it was very difficult to identify trends. So I think it would be interesting going forward to see or have a wider reflection of a total number of respondents. Very pleasing on question 13 that staff appreciation scored very highly. That was taken on board and will be fed back to all members of the freight team. So that was very pleasing to hear. At the other end of the scale, disappointing to hear that customers feel that freight service has remained the same on a year-on-year basis. Freight is something which we've identified as and really worked hard on to improve. This has certainly been seen by the reduction in the number of complaints in customer services, which through our own data analysis has dramatically reduced over the past 12 months. Likewise, we've seen a significant reduction in the number of claims being processed as well for breakages. So slight sort of conflict there in terms of question 12. I'd like to pick up on page 12. I agree, I think small improvements are more likely to have large increases in satisfaction. And that's something we're also working on, as highlighted by the previous managing director. We are working on price transparency and traceability. The current pricing structure of the freight system is complex. There's a significant number of charges, and a lot of work is going on behind the scenes to not change that, but to consolidate the actual pricing structure, to reduce the number of charges in operation, to make invoices when they're received easier to read. Traceability at the minute is done through a manifest which is completed prior to the ship sailing and is issued out to certain locations on the islands and is available to all to read. We hope to be able to implement a tracking system where freight is barcoded and scanned and able to be traced as it moves through the freight system. So it'll be scanned as it arrives on Penzance Quay, and as it goes through the system onto the ship, it'll be scanned again and then scanned again once it reaches St. Mary's. So at any time in the chain, freight will be identified in terms of its location. At the minute, this is the technology is there with our own system. It's certainly an aspiration of ours, but it's not something we're currently looking to bring in the immediate term, but it is certainly an aspiration. The landing craft question was a surprise when I read it in terms of the overall freight survey. I think we can certainly say that when the Mali Rose enters its familiarisation period in January, this will offer significantly more capability. It's stated in the survey that the landing craft was being used because of the limitations with the crane on the Gree. The capacity of the crane on the Mali Rose is over double of that on the Gree, so there'll be certainly an improvement there. Those are all the comments I've currently got on the survey. Is there anything different? No. In terms of, if I move on to the six questions.
Yes, if you'd like to continue.
Yep.
Okay.
In terms of the 6 questions as highlighted by Bob on page 18, some of these I've already picked up on, but to go through. Freight rates have not changed since 2016 in terms of the pricing structure. We've actually kept prices the same since 2016. I do appreciate there's a lack of transparency, which I've already met, and we are identifying this. In terms of rates that are currently in existence, they can really be split into two areas. We have obviously a small parcel rate, which makes up a vast majority of the freight which is shipped. And then other rates are carried out in terms of falling into certain categories, whether it's fresh produce, building materials, cars, vehicles, motorbikes specific. And that's where we're obviously seeing the problem in terms of over a significant period of time, those rates have evolved and got bigger and bigger, wider, and become rather complex. And that's where the transparency is now missing. Question 2. In terms of the facilities that the company uses for accepting freight goods, the facilities we have obviously been in existence since the Victorian times. We operate a Victorian quay in Penzance with a ranks building which is not fit for purpose. We are working with Cornwall Council on a coastal communities bid, which will see hopefully a £5 million fund, in which, as part of that, we hope to improve the freight service by knocking down the ranks building in Penzance and building a fit-for-purpose freight building. This will have cold and frozen storage within there, which will certainly improve the actual chill chain process. We're also looking at, as an interim measure, improvements in the chill chain by using frozen boxes which maintain the temperature of frozen goods over a 48-hour period. And rather than frozen goods being broken down on St. Mary's Quay, they'll be broken down in Penzance instead, put into boxes depending on their destination, and shipped forward. Question 3. In terms of the tracing, I've already mentioned that that's to do with the manifest, which is a legal document, and I've already explained about our aspirations on that. Question 4, please can you describe any arrangements your company will have in place for feedback and the customer experience information? We haven't carried out our own freight survey in recent years. We've instead done this through listening events, the last one being held 11 months ago. So we are due another listening event now. And freight was very high in terms of feedback responses. Our freight manager attended those, and our freight manager and other freight members of the team will certainly come to the next listening events. Question 5, in terms of number of journeys in 2017, well, obviously we know that degree comes 3 times a week, and it's been extremely reliable over the period. And then in terms of question 6, improvements to planned service, I've mentioned about the ranks building and the improvements to the chilled chain. Just to give an update, obviously, on the Malley Rose and the familiarisation period. We've been working extremely hard with a capital improvement project over the past 4 or 5 months in order to get the Malley Rose completed, which will happen by the 18th of December. She's had a new bridge propulsion system fitted, which has now been completed, with testing to happen early in January, and a new windlass as well. We have an operations team which meets weekly, and this is working towards the introduction of the familiarisation period, which will happen in January. To date, a lot of work's happened. Last week, representatives of our freight team met with key stakeholders on the island in a phase 1. There'll be other stakeholder meetings which will take place shortly as well, but we've already met with members of the council, Richard Hand Haulage, some members of the farmer flowering community as well, in order to ensure that we are meeting everybody's needs when we bring in the Malley Rose in January. New schedules will be published in the next week regarding the Malley Rose, so there'll be transparency for all to see as well. But obviously we're very excited when this happens in January.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and thank you very much for taking the time to come and give your views on all this and your contributions. And I'd like to open up the floor to questions from members. Councillor Sims.
I'm surprised you said it was 11 months ago. I thought it was more than that. But I went to it was in the Mermaid, wasn't it? The drop-in listening event. And I thought it was very good. And I did think at the time, because I was aware of this happening then, I thought that perhaps it was a shame we were doing this at the point we were doing it, because it wouldn't reflect the whole raft of improvements you had. And I think possibly we have been sort of perhaps caught in the wrong place with it. However, these things have to be done at some point. So but I thought what I heard at the Mermaid last year, I thought was very heartening, very positive. And obviously it's not all in place yet. It's still an ongoing process, isn't it? And just going to your first question, which I did mention at Mermaid last year, it's just in terms of you wanted to regularize the pricing for out, and I'm not the example I gave last year. I don't know if it's the case now because I've not done it this year. But if I asked for a bus tyre to be brought over, it was 35 quid. If I asked for a truck tyre, it was 6 quid, and it was the same tyre. So obviously I was careful to say truck as opposed to bus in future, but that's obviously a type of anomaly which is irritating if you're charged 5 times the price as you were previously just because you described it. You know, things like that was just my personal point.
Thank you. Any comments?
No, and we've had a few of those queries come through. The whole pricing structure is complex. In terms of the pricing structure, the key thing is obviously not to upset the whole economy of the islands. So we need to go through a consultation period to make sure the pricing structure isn't going to impact anyone adversely.
Councillor.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for attending. You mentioned that you've had a reduction in complaints and claims. I wondered if you could back that up with some numbers as well, please, if that's all right. And about the traceability and the sort of what kind of timescales are you looking at for that?
Thank you for the question. I don't have numbers to hand in terms of figures to support those, but I'm happy to provide them. In terms of traceability, our key focus at the minute is obviously bringing Mally Rose into the familiarisation period, the first one. And obviously once we've established that, then we can move forward on to the next phase, which will be the tracking and tracing.
Councillor Nellams.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a great supporter of the freight service. I work obviously for Tresco Estate, who are probably the biggest customers. I receive nothing but help when I'm at Penzance, nothing but help when I'm working through St Mary's, and nothing but help. And I see a great system when it's arriving on Tresco. And it's really heartening to see the new traceability operation that's coming into place. Also the ranks building, as you say, it's a very difficult place to work. It's Victorian, there's very little space. I often appear with truckloads of plants from Kew Gardens and I try and weave my way through the very thin section to the other end. And the fact that you're going to try and have a look at the ranks building is also very useful, especially as you're going to be introducing frozen facilities. So I'd just like to say I'm really pleased to hear about the new sort of additions and support what we get at the moment.
Just with the Coastal Communities bid, obviously that's being driven by Cornwall Council, and the ranks building is a Cornwall Council building. So although we're obviously implementing and inputting into the plans and its design, and obviously we're very hopeful, it's obviously on the delivery of that bid and its success, but we'll have to wait and see and keep our fingers crossed.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, again, thank you for coming to talk to us. It's really helpful. I think I'd just like to sort of go through just a little bit of the kind of findings of the survey, just for the benefits of the survey respondents, really, and just to ask you a couple of questions on that. So just I've done a very kind of quick summary of what I find. I mean, I just pushed back slightly on you to say it was a small number of respondents. I say it was actually, I think, a good number of respondents given the timescale of the survey. And I think there's a range of sectors there. Most of them are doing year-round business with yourselves, using frequent deliveries. So I'd say that's quite a reasonable cross-section to draw from. They've established that freight deliveries are essential to their business and they impact hugely on their business, as do, you know, most businesses on Scilly, I would say. So that feels like a kind of, you know, these are the right people to be answering the survey, if you like. So that felt like a good response rate for us. In figure 8, there was which is on page 67 of the report. Sorry. Yes, figure 8, page 67. Yeah, satisfaction rates were probably, I think if it was my business, I'd be a bit disappointed with that. And I know these are slightly subjective. I think it is somewhat disappointing, the satisfaction rates. Don't know if you wanted to comment on that at all.
Thanks, Councillor Smith. Yes, I said in my opening introduction that obviously I was disappointed that one of the other questions said that people felt that the service hadn't improved year on year, and obviously the satisfaction is disappointing. However, I was obviously pleased to see that the Off Islands seem to rate service better than that on St Mary's, but it's something obviously, and obviously I realise some of this information will be confidential. I'd like to sit down with Bob and actually sort of get behind the numbers, actually identify where these areas are so that they can be addressed.
Yeah, sure. And so just drilling down in I mean, some of the survey does flesh out some of that a little, I think. So drilling down into the reasons, the responses would suggest that some of the disappointments was around damage caused. I mean, this is in figure 10, actually. Late deliveries, non-acceptance, billing issues. And these all feel like they're resolvable issues largely. And yeah, listening to community members, I think people tend to be much happier with freight on a day-to-day level if it arrives on time and undamaged, which actually most of the time it does. But of course, people often remember the kind of the bad instances and you know, the bottles of milk or the eggs stacked at the bottom of a crate and, you know, that sort of thing. It's relatively simple things that are resolvable. I think that's maybe an issue to take away. And I guess in terms of billing and costs of freight, obviously they are a big issue for everybody, and obviously you have your cost to run the business, but I think that transparency of pricing will, and the traceability and the improved service overall probably will help a lot in terms of customers' perception, is my belief there, I would say. And just to sort of go on very slightly, figure 11, you know, there does seem to be a somewhat declining experience. Again, that's probably something to take away. On the plus side, you know, as you said, I think the positive comments about staff are very encouraging, and I've certainly backed that up personally. And work in difficult circumstances, you know, we all recognise that they work in difficult physical circumstances and in poor weather often, and, you know, particularly the Lioness and the Gree do fantastic work in often dreadful weather. And we do all really appreciate that, and certainly from an off-island perspective, that's very, very encouraging. So I just sort of finished my comments with saying, you fleshed out some of this already, but can you suggest any more improvements that could be made in the future to sort of improve the survey respondents' satisfaction levels, I guess?
I think one of the key things is, you know, we are working with the facilities that we've got. You've already highlighted, Councillor Smith, that we are working in difficult circumstances, effectively the weather with an open quay, which especially in the middle of winter is extremely difficult to work on, and certainly applaud everybody who works in our freight areas with the sort of lengths that they go to ensure that freight is delivered as well as it can be on time given the circumstances. So I think, you know, we certainly have to keep that in. And as part of this satisfaction, this is where I do think it'd be good to drill down into the numbers to see whereabouts it is failing. You've mentioned obviously about breakages. I do feel that that certainly actually has improved. In terms of overall improvements, I certainly think facilities on both quays could be improved further, which would certainly assist us. And hence, if we can, if Cornwall Council can successfully get that bid to change the ranks building, that will certainly help.
Thank you.
Councillor Sims.
Just referring back to figure 10, I mean, I remember looking at the survey in its early stages, and I think that the data in figure 10 is slightly awkward because it could happen once or it could happen hundreds of times. So I think from your perspective, it's quite heartening that the binning accuracy, which obviously everybody gets, is actually quite low down in the terms of problems. So, because that is one that's going to be consistent amongst everybody, but the rest of it could be one or thousands. And also, could you just go through the timeline for the Marley Rose again, because I'm sure everybody's dead keen to know, and if anybody's listening, I think it'd be useful and a positive thing to do at the minute.
Thank you, Councillor Sims. In terms of the Marley, the timeline has been obviously the capital works are currently ongoing, which is to this bridge propulsion system, which has been improved, and a new windlass, which was a class requirement. That will be completed by the 18th of December, just before Christmas. In the beginning of January, and obviously this is slightly fluid at the minute, but at the beginning of January, we will start a 2-week trial where we'll be carrying out its final trial testing with compass swings and actually commissioning the new bridge propulsion system. Late January, we will be looking to bring her into a 3-month familiarization period. In between now and that period, we will be discussing with all key stakeholders in terms of any changes or any sort of requirements that they need, which are going to change from the GRI, so we can make sure that everything is addressed.
So this sort of plan is sort of March-ish, hopefully to have it up and running normally, really.
Well, in terms of that will be the closure of the first familiarization period.
Yeah.
The idea over that is obviously to gain as much information and data and see where further changes need to be made in terms of the actual vessel, if that's required. So there may be other familiarization periods post that, but obviously if it is a success after those 3 months, then yeah, we'll be bringing her into service following that point.
And I am in no way, shape or form a salty-old sea dog. What is a bridge propulsion system? It sounds to me like the bridge can actually leave the Marley Rose and do it on its own. Clearly that's not the case.
No, the existing bridge propulsion system was found to be working, but not as up-to-date and responsive as we wished it to be. So we've actually changed it to a new modern system. So it just gives the master an improved controlling of the vessel. So it's so yeah, that's what that is.
I sort of that moves away from the whistles they used to have. Thank you.
Are there any more questions from anybody?
Yeah, Chairman, I just
Sorry, Councillor Marcus.
for the familiarisation period, you're obviously probably aware of all the Marley Rose is infamous on the islands about what's happened so far. So I'd urge transparency and openness around what's going on, just so that would probably make everyone's life easier in the long term.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'll just come back to kind of the request from the Acting Managing Director. I'm very happy to sit down and talk through the results. This would be within the requirements of the privacy policy surrounding the survey itself, where all the individual responses were required to be deleted by the 25th of May when the new GDPR requirements came in. But yeah, more than happy to talk about the survey results in more depth. In terms of the small number, I'd agree with Councillor Smith that was actually quite a good response given the time of year and the short period of the survey. When you're looking at there's kind of two aspects. One is the picture drawn about the business profile and the actual requirements and needs, and those are quite kind of clearly kind of laid out. In terms of the analysis, when you're looking about the overall side of things, when you're using the whole data set, you can be reasonably pretty confident that those statistical results are valid. When you start breaking things down among, say, sector and things, it becomes weaker, and then you can't do anything. So yeah, at some point the resolution drops off and you can't really rely on kind of formal statistics looking at the narrative. The other aspect of that is a lot of that kind of narrative is around, and analysis is around perceptions. So perceptions of improvement, perceptions of satisfaction, things whereas it clearly seems to be a disparity between the quantitative data that the company has kind of put together over the last year or so. So I can understand your disappointment that perceptions maybe don't seem to have moved on, whereas actually within the company you've noted kind of quantifiable change. So hopefully those will filter through and kind of improve perceptions, I would suggest. But yeah, thank you. Bye.
Any more questions? Councillor Smith.
Not really a question, just a comment of, very much appreciate your engagement in this process. And it is clearly obviously a very important issue for everybody on Scilly. And, please pass on our thanks to particularly those working at the sharp end on the coalface, and our thanks for, keeping us supplied.
Thank you. I'll pass those comments on.
Andrew.
Chairman, yes. Could I just thank you and your committee for your interest in this and for your constructive and objective observations. I read the survey with great interest, and rather than getting embroiled in the detail, I sort of took the broader picture. And of course, it was a demand-side survey, and that's very sensible. It's looked at purely from the point of view of the experience of the customer. I think it'd be interesting to look at the supply side, which highlights the complexity of the service. And actually, in some of the comparative notes which were made in the data about the Scottish Islands and others, that distinction was laid bare. And so I think it would be interesting just to acknowledge and to understand the distinction between the actual freight transport bit and the entire supply chain. And I noted some of the questions in Scotland about responsibility for damage or traceability or breakage or anything like that was straight back to the haulier or the supplier. And so put simply, if a shipping service operates a service where vehicles drive on and drive off, that's their responsibility. It's actually quite simple to achieve. Or in our case, if we were to operate a service where we simply accepted loaded containers and then unloaded those containers at the other end and our job was done, it would be incredibly easy. So a huge amount of the work, which it's almost a bit of magic really, which is undertaken both at Penzance Quay and St Mary's Quay, is in accepting goods, checking goods. Sometimes the eggs which are broken are not put on the bottom by us, but they come as a pack already and we don't know they're there. But of course, we have to deal with the implications of all of that. So I think a look at the supply side, and that's something I know we're keen to talk to the community about long term, about how the freight service might evolve, is important, because I agree it's of fundamental importance to the economy. And the last point I'd make really is that, the Marley Rose, we've got a long way to go yet with familiarisation and everything else. But if you just look at the bigger picture, she is not just a ship, but she's effectively a floating warehouse when she's alongside Penzance Quay and St Mary's Quay, and we'll be able to work aboard her. And we've got space and chilled and frozen aboard her, which we haven't got in the same way aboard the Green Maretha. So there will be challenges, but there'll be great opportunities as well with the introduction of the Marley Rose.
We shall look forward to seeing her.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, both of you, for coming. Extremely helpful. Recommendations? Sorry.
I forgot to mention it. Thank you, Bob. I thought it was really, really useful seeing the answers, the questions and answers from the other operators in Scotland and various other places. That was quite enlightening, I think. And obviously, particularly the Aran Islands, are smaller than us, and they have similar type of issues, really. So yeah, I mean, that was really useful, and thanks for that, Bob. You reminded me when you mentioned it then. But thanks again.
Recommendations to the committee. Number 1, that members consider the results of the freight survey and the analysis performed. 2, that members consider the views of freight providers attending the meeting in relation to opportunities for improvement and contribution of the freight network to supporting economic growth on the islands. Would we have a proposer, please? Councillor Smith, thank you. Seconder. Councillor Sims, all those in favour? Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. I'm sat by the fire. Sat by the fire. It's great.
Have we got something to come in with?
Yeah, Jeff Griffin, the county commander.
Right, item number 5. South West Ambulance Service NHS Foundation Trust annual report. We'll just wait and see if we've got Jeff Griffin. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning. Can you hear us okay?
I can.
Good. Thank you very much for your report. But in future, could we have this report 5 days before our meeting? Because we only received it yesterday, and some members may not have read it all. I've skimmed through it all, but we would really appreciate that we could have these reports earlier, because we do have lots of other reports to read as well. So in future, that would be possible.
It is quite long. There was some delays with some of the data that I needed for it, but certainly in the future we will provide that.
Thank you very much. Would you like to present this report, please?
Certainly. I mean, obviously, as we highlighted, there's quite a lot of data in there, so I picked out kind of the key aspects from it that I feel that may be relevant for the information that was requested by Bob Dawson. Just to introduce myself, I am Jeff Griffin, County Commander for Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly. We changed to a different model in the earlier part of this year, whereby we now work on county basis as opposed to it being part of the county. So historically it was West and East Cornwall. So this gives us a better overview, better linking with commissioners and themselves. I have noted on the report there's some numbers, figure 8 and on, there's replication of figure numbers, so I apologise for that one. The information we received from certainly indicates that there's a few things that you would like to know further, more information about, which is what I concentrated on. The first of which is activity. We have managed to, or we have quite a very good informatics team that can pull a lot of data into a lot of different reports and systems. So what we managed to do is pull the iOS specific details, for instance, for the 999. Obviously, I'm aware there is a PTS element. I do have that there are set data sets. But obviously, it was the 999 work where we've seen the difference in activities. I think it's quite important to understand. Historically, what we've always found is the Scilly Isles, predominantly some areas, can be around 400 jobs a year. That has increased over the last couple of years, as the figures show within the information on page 2 of my report. In 2016-17, between November 2016 and October 2017, it's 462 999 calls. Now, I picked a very specific period there because in November 2017 there was a change to the ambulance response programme, and how we triage calls, which will obviously potentially change some of the dynamics within the categories. So you will see more category 1 calls because of the way they were triaged. What that does do is it means it's very difficult to compare performance. Obviously, the number of calls is an easy task because they are recorded into the system. Performance is slightly different because what was pre-November 17 doesn't necessarily. Pre-November 17 was a different triage outcome for a patient than post. So that performance one is different, but certainly it's the same. So 2016-17, November to October, 452. For the same period, 2017 to 2018, 528. Now, doing the maths on it appears to be something like around 14% increase in our calls, which is disproportionate considering we see something like 0.28 increase in the baseline call. Something that I certainly would like to drill into to work out where that sits. Figure 2 demonstrates those two activities on page 2, figure 3 demonstrates those two activities overlaid against each other, which shows an increase in the activity between January and April, and then a continuing ongoing increase since July into October. So again, there's not natural periods of increase that I expect to see. I certainly expect to see some in the summer months, as we know, during times of events, swim city, auto, gigs, that sort of thing. So there's some work there I'll have to further explore. On the next page, page 3, figure 4, what I'm showing there is the activity per island. We can obviously record the origin, record the postcode. From that, we can then determine which island it's coming from. Naturally, we would expect to see high activity on St Mary's. What this shows is that Brian and Tresco seem to be generating the other larger amounts of activity. The next few pages break the islands down into the individuals. Again, for the ones that we know, St Mary's naturally pretty much followed a very similar theme. As I said earlier on, has an increased activity from February through April, and July through to now. St Agnes, again, it's across the whole year, so the early part, November through January, April through June, August through October. Brian, it's quite an interesting one, as it seems to be predominantly the majority of the year, so December through September, which again, yes, summer months, but may not be where I expected to see such an increase in activity. Moving to page 6, we can see Tresco, which again is seeing a very similar start Brian and Tresco as Mary's, again throughout most of the year, certainly from December, January through to July, skipping out to August, and then back September, October. Following St Martin's, a very slight increase in March, and again an increasing picture from sort of mid-July through to the end of October. So there is definitely an increasing trend between July and now of activity. Page 3 discusses performance scores, performance metrics. As I said earlier on, the problem we have is that with the introduction of ARC that started in November 17, but continued through until around May, June this year, with some further changes, which makes it difficult to give specifically the right performance or figures. What I listed there are categories. Cat 1, 2, 3, and 4, 999. There are other Cat 4 categories, which is HCP. So we have to get professional bookings, admissions to acute hospitals. I'm going to include those because that's it's a large piece of work to understand what happens there. But 999 is what I'm concentrating on. These are the new post-ARC targets that the ambulance service nationally have to abide to. So if you look at Cat 1 there, we look at a median of 7 minutes, so an average 90th, so 90% of 9 out of 10 patients receive Cat 1 response within 15 minutes. Having had the Cornwall Scrutiny Committee last week, One of the things that was raised was around extended wait times. It's a slightly different scenario, obviously, because of the way that you work and the workload, the number of calls that come in. Yes, there are cases where you get 2 calls come in at the same time, but the majority of the time it's a single call. So it's slightly more complex to apply because of the way of working mobilisations, call cycles, and that sort of thing on the islands compared to here. But yes, there are potential for longer calls. However, we review any local call for any critical harm and then report back to directors. Cat 2, as you can see, 18 minutes at 40th to the 90th. Cat 3, 60 at 120. And then Cat 4, there was no mean, however, 180. What we can find within some of this is that the RRB is not a clock stop, as traditionally was historically because of the early revisions to response times. So we can see instances whereby an RRB will attend the patient in 5-6 minutes, then it may take us about 10-15 minutes to get the nearest ambulance to that patient. But when the ambulance arrives at the scene, that is the clock stop time. So in fact, clinical care may start long before the patient has a conveying resource. One thing to note there is that we do not routinely split the hours of facility from the figures from the mainland Cornwall. It's not an unachievable task, but obviously the numbers are very low compared to the mainland Cornwall, where we're significantly higher. It's about 100,000 jobs a year versus that 500. But it is something that if we need to, we can certainly pull out. The bottom page 7 there discusses what's been termed as call stack. That is those long wait patients. We had recently as an organisation elevated it to our highest risk rating within our corporate risk register. That's been shared with our lead commissioners, which is Dorset, and all the local commissioners around the trust. As part of that, what we can do is get some support from the local commissioners in resolving or helping to reduce the call stack. It is an notability. We have a finite resource, staff and vehicles, geography of certain areas may be difficult, certainly within Cornwall. I lost you for a second. And what we can do is try to provide that best care we can with it, but with the support of the existing partners. So if you hear calls that, it does relate to the long waits potentially for the lower risk calls. Page 8, one of the elements that was asked to be discussed was communications. Historically, this is on the hands involvement now with the Arts Facility for probably 4 years. During that time, we've gone through various iterations of communications devices, pages, several versions of radios, mobile phones, landlines. We have had a struggle. There's no gain to be trying to say anything different. There's some topography issues on some of the areas of the island whereby the signal can't get through. There have been upgrades to the airway network, certainly, locally, which have increased the capacity, but we do still have times where it's difficult. Very soon, what we're moving to is there is a handheld radio that we use nationally in the ambulance service, which is on the vehicles on the island. There should be, with the clinicians now, home charging docks whereby we will reallocate those radios to individuals. Therefore, it's a direct point-to-point contact as I rely on going back through the clinical hub or through playing mobile networks. So that is our next plan now to address the communications issues. Moving forward, then we'll be able to a different network provider, which again is part of the National Ambulance or Emergency Services network, which is provided by EE. We have fed back, we've had meetings with EE whereby we've looked to match the Cornwall and the Arts Facility and suggested areas based on their information, whereby we require group service. They're working towards providing that for us ahead of it going in place, which we don't have data currently. So our life is now looked at conversation within the request of information. Obviously, Starlight was commissioned in 2013. It is essentially a floating ambulance. Naturally, I'm sure I don't have to tell certainly the committee, SALT doesn't aid the modern medical equipment that's on the boat from the vessel itself. So over the time, we've had a few problems with some mechanical breakdowns and also the fabric of the equipment and vessel around decay through the salinity of the air. The start life was overhauled in April 2018 at significant cost in Falmouth. That was internal and external and engine rebuilds. Since its return, I've only worked a couple of days where we had it offline, and that was for maintenance work or short repair servicing. We have a current boat in place, which today we have no problems with accessing such notice. On page 9, it discusses volunteer recruitment, support and development. I've taken this to the community first responders that we got on the off-islands. They're a valuable, dedicated team of individuals that provide an immediate response to the patient for us. Alongside that, they will assist the clinician from whichever key to get to the patient via meals, and then also return if so be it the patient to the start of life or to a fly-out location. As we recognise, there is a reducing number of individuals. I'm aware of obviously there is issues around winter time and people taking leave of the island, which obviously reduces the numbers of individuals in the teams. The community engagement team, we can trust, are the ones that are managing the numbers, the availability, and obviously they're looking at all other alternatives. If we can get more volunteers, then that would be fantastic. But also we have to recognise that there are significant numbers of fire, Coast Guard and other services that we've been linking to. So that's this work that's going on certainly with the community engagement team. Also within that, they are volunteers, so they are not paid. We recognise that and we use our clinicians to try to support them with training, with maintenance of equipment. What we're looking to do, I've got an expression of interest, currently awaiting returns from the islands, from our clinicians, is around the paramedics and the ECAs supporting the off-islands for a period of allocated hours per month or week or however best. So again, it's not my place to sit here, 20, 30, 40 miles away and suggest how it's done. It should be done by those on the islands. Attending each of the off-islands, reviewing the equipment, looking at the mules, making sure that it's up to date, it's clean, it's appropriate, any training provided, and also looking at the storage side of the mules and the equipment as well, and not forgetting, of course, the welfare of the responders. That should be in place very soon. I certainly have one individual at the moment that's keen to support that. Interoperability and other services that are suggested certainly in the community responders. We are looking at all options for working alongside partners, certainly fire, RNLI and Coast Guard. What we're also doing is through the GESIP principles of doctrine is to work alongside a lot closer. What we recognise, which is also, I think, leads into page 11 at the bottom of, is that there's a huge potential for an incident on the RTC and then the outcome that may have. We have held a tabletop exercise here to work out, given the knowledge that we know of the operational, tactical, strategic control structures that we have in place, both in the organisation and nationally, how that would reflect upon the incident that occurred on the islands. Part of that is working better with other partners. So that's being picked up by our emergency preparedness, resilience and response teams. On the back of that, we were also trained two paramedics on the RTC to be operational commanders. Again, if an incident was to occur right now, we've already highlighted that one of the GPs that returned to the islands this morning. Equally as much as we might have a similar struggle to get a commander onto the island. So we put that in place with the appropriate structures and communications to get ahead of anything should anything occur. If I take you to page 10, starting on St Mary's, I'm aware there has been some discussion, I'm confident there probably be some questions around that one, on the fulfilment of the staffing within the ambulance side of it. On the RRB, so the rapid response vehicle, the car, I'm quite confident we've got good numbers of paramedics who've got currently 6 paramedics on the islands. The ambulance side of it, there is a lower level of commissions, so ECAs, and the numbers are lower as well. Now we're working on a recruitment plan currently. We ran a 2-week advert in conjunction with the commissions on the island for the best spreading of the comms to anybody who may be interested. The key problem we are finding is within the licensing, so driving licensing of those individuals that may be interested on the islands. As of 1997 onwards, there were grandfather license, C1 classification on your driving license. Therefore, because there's no vehicles beyond obviously the freight services, if you have a driving license post-97, you will have to pay something around that £1,000 to have that category added to your license. Quite likely, if you have no need to drive a vehicle of that size and you have no need to have that license, you will not pay for it. Unfortunately, because of the weight restriction on our vehicles is something we need. I have on the back of the first recruitment plan as one individual put into the islands who we will be making further contact with. What we are considering doing is running a subsequent recruitment whereby we may be able to do something around the C1 aspect to allow a greater number of individuals, which will then allow us to increase the pot of ECAs. There was a discussion around the fleet that we currently have on the island, which is on page 10. Currently, we've got 3 vehicles. There is a specially adapted, in conjunction with the staff that work on it, Broadway peer reviewed vehicle and then designed and converted a Peugeot Boxer, which is our double crewed ambulance or DCA. There's then a second smaller vehicle, which is to better traffic, which, as I put there, is the garrison vehicle because of its ability to access through. And finally, a rapid response vehicle, which is the Scout, which is a 4x4 traction as opposed to all-wheel enabled RV, which is more than capable, as approved last year in the snow, to manage most other than the high snow drifts. Beyond that, obviously, there is the Star of Life, and on the off-islands, each has a fuel. One thing, again, I'm sure there'll be questions about fly ash from the islands. Historically, we have had fly ash from most areas which are fairly easy to accommodate with the airport facilities or other secondary landing sites on the off-islands. We also have fly ash, obviously, the landing sites that are designated for them, which can be equally as challenging as some areas where the port's in and we are unable to use our aircraft. Format obviously is Asian Coast Guard aircraft, but that has limitations due to its size and downwash. What we have found over the last probably 4 months has been an issue with scrutiny around fly apps. This has been borne by a document of which I'm trying to format an actual copy of. We believe it's a Civil Aviation Authority CAA document that specifies the level of risk that the aircraft should take dependent upon the severity or acuity of the patient. If it's a life-threatening or limb-threatening patient, then they have to go through less risk mitigation than a standard transfer. So this would be refueling, necessary restocking of open water, for ECH and that sort of thing. We've got a meeting in, I believe it's next week or the week after, whereby we have one of our lead consultants, anaesthetists that works with the aircraft for ourselves, in conjunction with the Coast Guard and commissioners. They don't need to work around the document, which we're going to review and hopefully resolve this problem long term. In the interim, because basically a risk mitigation in place that the existing plan has been in place, it has worked, and there's been no instance, therefore we reinstate the conditions under the existing document until such time as we can get a new revised document in place. Capabilities of one page 11, the 2 trained paramedics that we have on the islands. Obviously, what we're looking to do moving forward is then looking with any exercises at some various airports or docks. Obviously, another considerations around the cruise lines that we know navigate around waters. There is speed potential there, for instance, or biological problems of fire. So we'll work together with any instance that come about. Obviously, we're working closely with the LRFs and the right to work discussions, and obviously with the LCC Council on any plans exercises. That essentially brings me to kind of some elements within the summary there that talk about that we do have some problems, equally as much as I'm sure everyone else there does around transport on a lot of the islands. That's where we do have the resilience now, having the 6 paramedics, and obviously the coastal aircraft that take great responsibility, but I don't think it's not something that we're able to resolve. But obviously we do what we can to work within the limitations. Hopefully that gives you a basic report, given sorry the lack of time to go through it. Also, welcome any questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Sims.
Well, firstly, I see lots and lots of reports, and this one's excellent. It's concise, it's got loads and loads of information, and it was a pleasure to read. So it was late, but it was quite easy to grasp. The question I wanted to ask really is, I mean, this came up in Hosk maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It was, you know, the pager issues, you know, comms, particularly St Agnes was the issue, I think, back then. As you did allude to it, has it been more or less sorted out? And also, what did they used to do before? Did they have a siren or something? Because something simple like that, you can hear it all over St Agnes, I would have thought.
I don't know historically, but I certainly, living in the coast in Cornwall when I was, aware and used to hearing booms as a child. But we both used different versions. Certainly, we had an old radio system that was not anywhere like it is now many years ago. So the use of communications broadly was a lot less. So there was a lot less interference on the bandwidth. Essentially, the systems that we use now, we're thinking about a lot of the existing mobile networks. But of course, with thousands of people using it, the available bandwidth was a lot less. We have gone through several different versions of a simple pager. The ones that used to go from a shop to the network we've got now, airwaves, pages for those. We tried mobile phones, we tried dispatching the paramedic responsible for calling individuals, and also then get black spots with mobile phone networks. It's been a real challenge. Moving forward with the radios now, the big benefit is that they go point to point, so they don't necessarily need to go via an aerial somewhere. I know there's been across several times they're trying to increase the coverage, but there are still some blind spots. Essentially, these radios, I think, are probably the best thing that we're going to have at the moment. Beyond returning to historical systems like, say, sirens or booms or whatever, making that contact, I would suggest probably we're going to be further on the radio side, so I would suggest probably in the early new year or the tail end of this now, we're going to change the course out to reprogram and have them go live. So that's, always crossed this instant.
Oh, well, thank you for that. And it's reassuring to know you're looking at it. And I was quite reassured with some of the other comments you made about looking at contingencies, cruise ships and things like that, because that could potentially be really, really problematic. And also, I wasn't being flippant when I said about the siren. We've got one with the fire brigade have a siren over here, and everybody on the island knows it's a fire, whether they got a page or not, they're associated with it. And it does work very well, I think.
And that is going to explore. So I think we're in, we are in such a fire, quite naturally around, working together. We've got occupied to a certain extent the same building, so, we've got sources of awareness, significant numbers of fire responders on the island that maybe are working together. So maybe something that might have changed the tune side.
Councillor Nellams.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Jeff. You mentioned the community first responders on the off islands and the the possibility that numbers are dropping. Is there an optimum number on each of those off islands that you would like? I'm sure that looking at your notes, you've mentioned about dedicated paid time for training, and I'm sure with a bit of a sort of waving of the flag to say that more people are needed, it could be done quite easily. But I wondered how critical that's getting.
I don't think there's a concern. Obviously, we're aware that the numbers are lower than they were. It's difficult because there are some volunteers, and I'm not suggesting this is on the silly. I'm related to the fact that we had a award ceremony very recently. Last week, whereby we invited community responders to the mainland. There's examples of responders there where they have been around 331 days and 365 in the last 12 months. They were booked on essentially and available to the trust. So it really does depend on the availability of those individuals. Now we recognise they are volunteers, so they do have other jobs. Are those employers willing or self-employment can drop what you're doing and run away to where they're at? But my understanding is we're not concerned about numbers, but it would be nice to have more to allow individuals to leave the islands for leave and somebody else to pick it up, so we're not putting too much pressure on a very small set of individuals.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Marcus.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, I mean, the stats, I think it's a really clear report as well. Reiterate what Steve said. The stats for September in St Mary's are quite staggering. Really. That's 2 calls a day, which is a lot, I think. So I don't know whether you can comment about that. Also about the communications, I was involved with when the communications came back to HOSC about 4 or 5 years ago, and the issue was SWAS not talking to the people on the ground. So I just reiterate that talking to your staff over here about what works and what doesn't work is of vital importance to make sure that there's no issues around the comms and anyone feeling that they're not being listened to. I don't know if that's a pun or not. And just around the Star of Life as well. You said that they're undertaking a review. What's the sort of timeline of that review? How is that going to be reported to this committee? And are there implications around that?
Okay, the plans to be so scenarios data, quite interested me when I saw it and why it was a spike. We can expect seasonal, like I said, we expect around significant events. It does seem to be about, I haven't spoken to the commissions. It feels that maybe there's probably more primary care work in there now, whether that's because of the MPT meeting that they hold every day, obviously the working relationship between GPs and paramedics, I'm not sure. But it's something that I want to explore because, as I say, it's a significant increase in the number of incidents, which obviously does put a draw on it, puts pressure on, and if there is a second, say, worst case cardiac arrest, obviously the clinician has to make some quite difficult decisions to who's going to occupy their time. That's something I would look into. As far as the comms with the islands, I completely agree with you. It is very difficult. Potentially, with the distances involved, it is unfortunate we don't go very much as we'd like to. We are in frequent contact with the individuals, the usual open lines and emails and phone calls. I think certainly what works out very well is around this whole recruitment PCAs, voice discussion with clinicians. The C1 aspect and the concerns around the individuals, it wasn't something that I thought about, but on a good long chat with paramedics, it actually makes perfect sense. Why would you get that out of a license you don't really use? So we do everything we can. As an organisation, we use as many different means of communication as possible. So we've got things like Facebook pages. We have very recently, as we're using now to relative success, got Skype for Business. So we'll be holding more Skype meetings with Sim, just to avoid any problems. We get clinicians over here 4 times a year. for catch up with operational crews and training, so that there's opportunities there within the individuals. So it is a challenge, but we're trying what we can and certainly want to continue improving that link. Star Life-wise, we have let 2013 she was commissioned for 5 years old now. There comes a point where the cost effectiveness, fuel economy, etc. So we are looking at what is the best option. We're aware, obviously, that it has been off the road, off the water quite a bit over the last 18 months, but not since the refit. And is there a better alternative boat out there that we need to look at? Are there alternative boats on the island that we need to make in with individuals? So that's something we're working on at the moment. I'm hoping that I'll get probably something in the new year now. Obviously, the lead time on such a project will be a very long one. I'm hoping there in the year we might get some further information on the Start Life. You may have seen in the press that we're getting an additional number of new vehicles from government central funds, which has become a sort of priority one project currently, because we have a very limited time span before they're operational. So people that are involved in the Start Life work, including myself, have been drawn to that project. However, that's not to say that it's gone away. It's certainly there with the conscious, but obviously the refit at the moment, it's keeping on the water without any concerns.
Councillor Sims.
Regarding refits, not Star of Life, but you're probably aware that we have a dearth of engineering facilities on the islands at the minute. Have you got methodology in place for keeping the fleet running, really?
Yes, we have a small problem on engineering, which I think we probably everyone on the islands, community services. They were our primary maintenance for both the DCA and the Start Life. We have since made contact with a couple of other individuals, I believe, that maintain some other elements of public vehicles, postal police, etc. But we'll welcome any suggestions about individuals beyond that, which we've had a couple from our clinicians. But yes, currently we have something in place which will be able to maintain vehicles there. In fact, brought vehicles in, I want to say 2 weeks ago, did a complete safety inspection check. During which we've highlighted a few things that we will be looking to maintain a bit closer now.
Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Endorse all the comments made so far. Just a couple of questions. One around first responders. Living on St Martin's, I do see that there is possibly a problem in recruitment. I just wonder whether there could be other efforts made by you and your team to talk to the community to encourage more people to come forward. So that was one question. Then just also around picking up on Star of Life, clearly off-islanders see this as the floating ambulance as a very valuable asset, even if it does win the award for noisiest boat in Scilly. But it's encouraging because obviously there's a perception that it has had a very kind of checkered reliability record. So it's encouraging to read that there's been significant improvement in that. But in terms of the kind of lifespan of the vessel, could you sort of outline, what the thoughts are there, and in terms of how that might affect the service in the future, please?
I'll pick up the Star Life and come back to it. The Star Life lifespan probably better set within our fleet department because they're closer to understanding the availability of the parts. My understanding is the availability of the parts for the engines are our biggest problem. They're a very specific engine. There are only 2 of that vessel that I'm aware of. One of them is we identify a rescue as their fireboat, which means that they've all come naturally at a point where the engines just can't be replaced. Part of that obviously is the work we're looking at around maybe an alternative boat that is again custom built with the suggestion is 2 angles, because obviously then you've got a fallback, you can replace them quicker. Like I said, we're looking at it. I would suggest probably the new year now before the new vehicle output that will have more information. But I can certainly see if there's anything that is suggested in our fleet department around their expectations, maintenance schedules, that sort of thing, and feedback. On the CFR side, certainly, again, it's the community engagement team are the main people involved. I can feed back to them. If there are alternatives, pathways, which again is something that I picked up from certain argument and our clinicians, is that if we're trying to advertise it, it may even be as simple as putting a sign up in a place that we would think about. So, in shop, in the post office, in the office where people try to book flights, things like that. So if you have any suggestions of anywhere else that we can put adverts.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll send you an email and we'll discuss it. Thank you.
Jane Hurd.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Jane Hurd, Health Watch. We are looking to do a community engagement event on each of the off-islands during the new year, after New Year, when the weather's a bit better. If SWAST has any recruitment material or publicity around the issue of the first responders, we'd be happy to display it at them.
Okay, well, that's great. And I think also we need to, celebrate and praise the efforts of the volunteers at the same time, and also the difficult and challenging work that the main professions also varies as well. So, yeah, I'd certainly be welcome engagement on that.
Yes, I think all of us here actually would like to send our grateful thanks to all the first responders on the off islands and on St Mary's, and all the paramedics and the whole lot, really. We couldn't do without them. Any more questions from anybody? Thank you very much, Jeff. Thank you for your time.
We will have the board with you early next month.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Right. Agenda item 7, monitoring internal audit recommendations. Could I invite, yes, thank you, Robin Pritchard to the table, please? Welcome once again. You're going to take this one? Yep, right. I'd like to ask Bob to take this one, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, this is what it says, a progress monitoring report. The internal auditors are clearly here at the moment carrying out a block of work. This has been an annual feature coming to previously the Finance Audit and Scrutiny Committee, and subsequently Scrutiny Committee, about progress about internal audit recommendations made. The results are tabulated in table 2 in particular, separating out the implementation status by the level of priority given to each recommendation. There is one correction which I've been advised of by the Senior Manager for Strategic Development. So there is a shift in the row that says merits attention. There are 2 outstanding there in progress in 2016-17. One of these is at least partially implemented, have been advised, so there's now only 1 remaining outstanding there, and so partially implemented has gone up to 5. And I believe, I can follow up with that and update things. One aspect that arose was the kind of slightly cumbersome nature of presenting the recommendations in a rather large spreadsheet, especially given that out of the total of something like 82 recommendations, the great majority are now implemented. And there may be a case to be made to make the evidence or the information available that much clearer to members, public and the press, to maybe reduce or remove those implemented kind of recommendations from the working spreadsheet and kind of have remaining the partially implemented outstanding, because all those recommendations have previously come to the committee in the form of internal audit reports. Otherwise, I will leave it there and invite Robin Pritchard to maybe make any comment that he feels about the kind of ratings of implementation?
Thank you, Bob. I think it's fair to say that the report demonstrates more than satisfactory progress. Given that there were 82 in our first 2 years, it's obviously a lot of work for the officers to keep on top of some of these. So the report does show a positive approach to dealing with recommendations. I think it's possibly even more promising than what is portrayed here, because as we've been here during the week, we've been following up some of the longer standing recommendations, and there are certainly a number that we've found that are implemented, and they may just be as a result of management not having the time to respond to Bob's request for information. The only comments that I was intending to make refer to page 4, where we were talking at that stage about information governance, data security, and you'll remember that was one of the areas that we commented on in our annual report. There is still ongoing work by management in that respect, and we're talking to people this morning in terms of making sure there is a proper compliance gap analysis with regard to GDPR, so that we can close that one out by the end of the year. And the only other thing that I think I would draw your attention to is the implementation of financial regulations. You will know that full council did receive an interim set of financial regulations in October. I think the only comment that we would make is that when the full set is published for the end of the year, there's a need to look wider than the regulations themselves and to ensure that they fit with all of the other governance arrangements that exist within the council, including the role of this committee, which, as stated in its terms of reference, has a wider remit in terms of perhaps projects and scrutiny of proposals and development proposals. So it's a need to just make sure that everything hangs together so that the overall governance arrangements fit with financial regulations. But that said, delighted to take any questions that people have.
Any questions? Councillor Sims.
Well, quite heartened by your opening statements about the huge improvement, and I've certainly myself, I've noticed it in the clearness and amount of faith we can now put in the finance papers coming forward, because it's been considerably easier this year than last year, and last year was considerably easier than the year before, when frankly it was just a nightmare. So I'm glad that you've seen something that I've seen myself, perhaps more anecdotally rather than forensically. So I'm really pleased that you have basically agreed with what my view of the direction of travel. So thank you.
I think that's a good point, and it's certainly helping us with our audit work this block. We're able to get to a lot of information a lot faster, and Cornwall Council Finance team and the Revenue and Benefits team are providing detailed information overnight almost in order to help us get the work done during the block of work. So it's been good.
Excellent. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, again, encouraged by your comments there. Just going on to a couple of specifics. Just for a note on the report itself. Given the nature of the report, disappointing on the sign-off here. No senior manager and financial sign-off. So a note for improvement for ourselves in the future. I was actually had a note on that GDPR and data issues, and I just sort of want to take assurance from you that we are moving in the right direction and becoming compliant with the new regulations.
I don't think I've really got an update that would give you that confidence at the moment, only because we've only started following those up this morning. And as I've been sat here doing internal audits, David has been beavering around trying to get further information just to see how far the council has got. But we will include in our Block 1 report a section on follow-up, and we'll give you some commentary when you get that draft report, hopefully before Christmas.
Okay, just had a couple other questions. around licensing, can you explain why this recommendation hasn't been implemented? There was around the move of the licensing officer, was not meant to be managed by CEO.
I think that was as much to do with the wider job role that the person managing that part of licensing was involved with at the time, and therefore the post was better to remain within the CEO's office.
Right, okay. And one further, sorry. Yeah, just one further question around risk management. Yeah, just to say that, you know, this has been recognised by members. It came up in more than one item at full council. Yeah, I think we're aware of it. And just maybe your views on how risk management has changed in the organisation recently.
The Chief Executive has now procured the Gateway Risk Mate system and has been building the database for a couple of months now. I haven't looked at it yet as to how far it's got, but I believe the only sticking point at the moment is finalisation of the council's business plan, so that the risks can actually be attached to the detailed corporate objectives of the authority. As soon as that is done, then the system can go live, and the various managers can have access to it and update it on a regular basis.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Marcus.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's good to see the improvement. I mean, in paragraph 4, you had 54 recommendations in 16-17. That's down to 28 in 17-18. So that's a good movement in itself. A couple of questions of the 2 outstanding recommendations in 16-17, they're significant recommendations. How concerned are you about their implementation?
If I remember correctly, one is to do with the housing stock. I'm talking about paragraph 7.
Yeah.
I think that one will come to fruition as the various other recommendations have happened. So it is an outstanding recommendation, and probably there's an exercise to be done at the back end of the year, I guess, by the council in terms of just making sure that all these changes that have been made to governance actually come together to satisfy that one. So I'm not worried about that one. Information governance we've talked about.
Yeah.
The Kalamazoo system is one of the recommendations that I said we've already checked, and that system has been eliminated.
Yep.
It's no longer used. There is still ongoing attention to St Mary's Airport and car parking, and you'll be aware of the arrangements up there. I think some of that won't be tackled until the whole thing becomes a bundle.
Okay. My other question was just on the top of page 4 is about the implementations. 4 recommendations have been left out, which is about the key financial controls.
Yeah. Could I come in there?
Yep.
Please. Yeah. The spreadsheet that I put in the kind of shared collaborative workspace for senior managers, I'm not sure what happened at some point along the line. Those 4 dropped out of the spreadsheet. So I've since followed that up with the Section 151 officer and chief executive. So yeah, they are unassigned because there was a administrative error in saving the spreadsheet at some point.
Okay.
Yep.
And they're going to be assigned to someone and dealt with?
They are assigned. Yeah, they're just unassigned status. So there will be feedback to that. Yeah.
And looking quickly at them, I can see that at least one of those has been surpassed by other actions. So,
Councillor Sims.
Referring back to GPDR, have we got it right? Yeah, well, I think you know what I mean. Anyway, I know it's a big change, and I really can't look outside the authority on this one. But I assume we're not the only authority in the country which is having issues with this. It's a big change for everybody. Is our direction of travel sort of equivalent perhaps to other places? You probably may have a better idea of that than me.
I think it's true to say you are in a similar position to many organisations. I don't think there were significant changes. I think the question is more about evidencing what you do and making sure that what you do stacks up with what the Information Commissioner is asking for. So it's more an evidencing that you're doing things that are required under the new Act. Which is why we keep saying about, do the compliance gap analysis, work out then what the priorities are and close the more important gaps quickly, so that if you were to face an inquiry, you could be seen to be taking reasonable steps. So we shall have a better idea after this morning's work.
May I come in there, Chairman, please?
Of course, Matthew.
So just a question for me is, presumably, you're engaging with Council Data Protection Officer, Simon Mansell.
We're talking to Craig and Gemma this morning and then following on with Simon. But we have had correspondence with Simon in the past.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Okay.
Are there any more questions? No, thank you very much, Robin.
I'll propose the recommendations,
Oh,
Chairman.
recommendations, yes, I'm sorry. Where are we? Recommendations for committee that members note progress made against internal audit. Recommendations from 2016-17 and 2017-18, subject to the consideration of the committee. Number 2, that members identify any areas in relation to which they require additional assurance from management or that merit consideration for the committee's work plan. Could I have a proposer, please? Councillor Sims, seconder. Councillor Watt, all those in favour? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Robin. Okay. Right. Agenda item 8 is Ethical Standards Annual Report. Matthew, okay?
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great, so apologies, this is later than it should have been, and thanks to Councillor Marcus for prompting me to come in. I'll skip to the appendix in a moment, but a point from the covering report is, are you content for future annual reports to come to you at roughly the same time of year, or do you want to shift to another part of the year? So perhaps give some consideration to that. I am comfortable either way, but what I would suggest is that we probably avoid them coming to annual council, because every 4th year there's going to be plenty of members coming in, and perhaps that's not the right time to consider this. So if we just skim through the appendix and then come back to the recommendations. What I would like to do is try and cover as many things as I thought relevant to this report, including the terms of reference of the committee insofar as they relate to the ethical standards regime. And this report only focuses on those provisions. So I'm not looking at scrutiny or audit functions. So, the composition of the committee there. The first key thing, which is a really new for me at the moment, is the matter of independent persons, because you're required to have some. I think there's some uncertainty over whether we still have independent persons in place. I'm pretty sure that we had somebody appointed back in 2013 or just before, but I'm also very sure that we haven't been paying them their allowance, and so by default they may have dropped away. I also think I'm right in saying that about 2 years ago, an attempt to recruit was made, and I think one of the core council independent persons stuck their hand up, but I'm not sure that that was ever formalised. Now, it is important that we sort this out, not only for the ethical standards regime, but because those independent persons also have a role to play in relation to chief officer employment matters. And so it's really important we do that. A bit of advertising, I'm sure, I hope we'll be able to get some people in the frame. And it may well be worthwhile looking towards the council independent persons who've already been through a detailed recruitment process. And that will also ensure that there is a significant degree of independence from people on the islands. Moving on to officer support, well, it's Ian Simon primarily, but Andy, Tom, and Bob are a great help, and I'm truly grateful to them, and they provide me with a great deal of assurance because it is quite difficult to do this role from a distance. Flipping on to assistant councillors, etc., with observance of the code of conduct, we've provided some ad hoc advice throughout the year, both in meetings and outside of meetings. It's mostly around interests. Your last formal training was in May 2017. I think a training session every couple of years is probably enough. And so I suggest that Simon and I deliver another session in the middle of next year to make sure that everybody's up to speed on what their code obligations are. That said, I find it very encouraging that members are clearly thinking about their code responsibilities because of the number of queries I get about interest, participating in meetings, registration of interests, and so that's great. I want to point out a mistake in the report in the fourth paragraph of the assisting councillors section. The penultimate sentence in the fourth paragraph should be in the reference to related procedures. And so with the question, I'd like to correct that before the report is referred on to council. Dispensations in the next section, we don't get any, it seems, or certainly none come across my radar, I'm sure they would. But what we don't have is a procedure for dealing with them between meetings. I'd really like to work on something to allow that facility, because if we've not got something planned for scrutiny, and there's a good case for considering dispensation requests for something else, we're a bit stymied if we don't have a procedure in place to deal with it. We have a procedure in Cornwall that I can plagiarise. I'm sure Simon will find out he needs to go through that. Appointing panel members to deal with ethical standards issues hasn't been necessary. I'll come on to it in a minute. We've only had 2 complaints in the last year. As and when it's needed, I will get in touch with you to make sure that happens. I've had no cause to put reports before you other than this one, but certainly I'm anticipating bringing other reports to you as a consequence of some of the things that I referred to in this annual report. In reviewing terms of reference to the committee, I noticed we've got that odd provision in there about compiling a list of possible conflicts, and quite frankly, I don't think that serves any useful purpose. It's an administrative process we don't really need to do, and it's an administrative process that I don't think we're doing. I'm pretty sure the list doesn't exist. And so I think a recommendation to council to remove that requirement is sensible. It is dealt with in other ways through the discussions that there are when appointing to committees and through members simply being aware of their obligations. So on to complaints received. High number of complaints, 2 in the last year. To put that in context, to date, from the 1st of April 2018, calls at 134. So it's quite an industry over here, and let's hope it never gets to that stage over on the islands. I don't think there's a lot to say about the 2 complaints. Neither or both were rejected, and there were no reviews requested of those complaints, and so they're done and dusted. You need to be aware, and you probably are aware, that the the Committee on Standards in Public Life is reviewing the future of ethical standards. And I think that comes from a number of calls from local government and others that the current ethical standards regime is pretty much toothless because there is no opportunity to impose meaningful sanctions as there were under the previous mandatory regime. So at the end there, I've highlighted 5 things I expect to see in the next year. But of course, it's down to you as members as to whether you support that happening. So reflect framework code of conduct, a review of the code of conduct and procedures, consideration of the introduction of a member officer protocol. I haven't touched upon that on my skip through. The direction of council constitutions anticipates there being a protocol to help manage member officer relationships. I know there was an attempt in about 2015 to advance that piece of work, but it was rejected by council. I'm not quite sure why, but I do think it's something that ought to be considered again. Even if it's not something we have to refer to all of the time, but we can put some important things in there about the mutual respect, and also making sure that there are no surprises for members in relation to activities that are happening that they need to know about. The review of the ethical standards regime, I will report to you as there are advances with that. Simon manages watching that space closely, and he will update me, and from there I will get a report to you, or reports to you. And then the last, and I think the most pressing thing at the moment, is a review of the arrangements for independent persons, because we do need to make sure that they are in place in case needed. I think I'm right in saying that in the current scheme of allowances, the SRA for independent persons is £110 and 9p, and so it shouldn't break the bank to get a couple in place. So if I can come back to the recommendations on the recovery report, please. Recommendation 1, I think I would ask that I amend that, or we amend that to members know the report and submit it to council. The next recommendation is about sorting out those independent persons, and it's a decision the committee can make. Recommendation 3 is a recommendation on to council. Recommendation 4 is a decision the committee can make at this stage to authorise or support me in reviewing the member code of conduct and the procedures around it. At a point in time, once that review has been undertaken, there'll be a report to council for decisions to be made on accepting a new code, maybe, or a revised code, and maybe revised procedures. But in relation to that, we also need to keep an eye on the time scale for the national review of the code. But there's some improvements we can make to the code and the procedures at this stage to make them a bit more fit for purpose. Recommendation 5, again, is a decision that the committee can make. And I'd like to think that we can encourage as many members as possible to attend that training when it is arranged. And the last recommendation should be a recommendation on the council on reflection. And so with that, I'll leave it to you, Chair. Happy to take questions. We'll try to answer them. But otherwise, back to you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Are there any questions? Councillor Sims.
I haven't got any questions really, but I just, as Mike just said, no questions because you pretty well answered them all, Matt. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we'd like to reiterate the thanks to the staff team as well. I think all the committee appreciate the work that they do in clarifying reports and make sure reports and issues are dealt with quickly. So that's good. And with that, I'd like to propose the recommendations pretty much all as one.
You want to take them all as one, or do you want to take them individually?
As one, with that change about submitting to council.
Subject to the changes, that was members note the report and submit to council.
And number 6 as well.
And number 6 to go to full council. Do you want to put a time limit on that? Full council in May. It's annual council in May.
Matt, what do you think about for number 6?
Okay, I think we could aim maybe to bring a report to the committee in March.
Right.
Because that should be a relatively simple piece of work to do. And then we'll see what we go to from there, because you might want to receive the report and think about it some more. What I would say is that with the uncertainties with government at the moment, probably what we need to keep an eye on is whether we get a snap general election. If we do, my time is largely going to be diverted to that, because over at Cornwall I'm responsible for the electoral services team as well. So let's perhaps pencil it in for March, but can we please keep an eye on that? There may need to be specific depending on what happens with the government.
Yes, so is that to come to our scrutiny meeting in March? Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a report to you in the first instance, so that you can think about it and say, we don't like what you've done, go and do it again,
right.
Or we like what you've done, let's recommend it to council. Although if we get the recommendation to council at its January meeting, they'll be able to say, yes, we support it, we don't support it, and if it's not supported, that's the end of it.
Yeah, can I confirm what the it is, please, Matt? Is that the review or the member officer protocol?
So I was talking about the member officer protocol, sorry. That's okay. So the review of medical standards, I aim to bring that to March.
Yep.
Or the review of medical standards March. The member officer protocol, we've got to make sure the council supports it. And if council supports it at the January meeting, then you'll receive a report from me at the March meeting.
Okay.
Right.
So I propose all of that.
Yes. Bob, have you got all that sorted?
Yes, I'm sure. Yeah, between us, we've got it. I'm sure we've got it covered. Thank you.
Right. Okay. So we'll take recommendations 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 all in one go. And Councillor Marcus, did you propose that?
Yep, I did.
Propose that. Could I have a seconder, please? Councillor Nellams, all those in favour? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matthew. Where's my list? Here we are. Right. Agenda item 9, a scrutiny committee work plan. Bob, do you want to take us through that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. This is a standing agenda item, and I've kind of slimmed down the actual work plan to hopefully make it a bit more kind of readable. One thing that's the Chairman's brought to my attention, although we've got the Vice Chairman there as not appointed, I gather there may be some interest, and there may be some. You want to say a few words, Chairman, about
yes,
that?
I actually would very much like to have a Vice Chairman, because it's very useful to have when I'm having my chair's briefing, to have a second opinion. We have had an expression of interest in having a Vice Chairman. Do you want to do this at the next scrutiny meeting, or what about, what do you think, Matt? Can we do this?
I think if you're away for quite a lot of January, aren't you?
Yes.
I mean, it's.
I'm actually away for 3 weeks.
If there's an issue with it, fine, but otherwise.
Can we actually appoint a Vice Chairman now, or would it be better to ask the rest of the committee, because I'm down to only 4 at the moment.
There's 4.
Sorry.
We are quorum. We are quorum.
You're all right. Sorry, I've lost the thread slightly.
Sorry, Matt.
Like,
Matt, it's Andrew Thomas here. Just by way of explanation, it's not on the agenda, and not all the members were aware that there is to be a vacancy or a contest for Vice Chairman at this meeting. So I would say there probably is that issue where even if someone is not here and we're not fully, the whole group isn't here, that someone might have said, actually, I want to put my name forward to be Vice Chairman, but I just won't be there.
Yes, I think perhaps we should get it on the agenda for March.
Well, so you can appoint somebody in their absence.
Right.
So that's doable. And if you're a vacancy for vice chair now, you can do it at this meeting. I think we can legitimise it on the basis that the procedure rules allow the appointment of chair and vice chair. And if you've not got a vice chair appointed and something were to happen to you as chairman, what do we do? So,
you're seeing my age, is that what you're talking about?
well, you know, I was worried about the faulty tyre on Steve's bus. An accidents that might come about by reason of that. So,
There's 6 faulty tyres, it's not just the one.
I'm just a bit, that we have not discussed this with the rest of the committee.
Can I just make a point? I think when we virtually had a full committee, when this was discussed earlier in the year, however, I wasn't here, I don't think people were champing at the bit.
Well, no, because nobody put themselves forward for
So,
for
I mean,
vice chair.
I just think, I mean, obviously, I'm very happy to do it. If you think it would make it easier for you, I'm happy to do it on that basis. But it just seems rather pointless doing it in March when you're going to have to do it in May.
Can I ask the rest of the committee if they would be in agreement with this? Steve?
Yeah, I would take Steve's recommendations. I think if he wants to do it, I think absolutely ideal.
Dan?
Yeah, I've got no issue at all with it.
Okay, Mike?
And the same if Steve's willing, especially as you're away in January.
Right, okay. Can we take a proposal then?
So I propose that Steve is vice chair of the scrutiny committee.
Second that.
Thank you very much. All those in favour? Thank you. Okay, Steve, you are vice chair. I will inform the rest of, I'll send the committee an email
Yeah. Okay.
tonight and confirm that and tell them what's happened.
Yeah, thank you. I will update the work plan to that. And thank you, Matt, for the advice there.
Right.
The committee is due to have a workshop in January, which we need to send an invitation out, which will provide a forum to have further discussion. But otherwise, I'll take the report as read and open it up to further questions.
Any questions on the work plan?
Just about
Councillor Marcus.
the capital projects, because there's some discussion in the briefing we had with Nicholas Stinson about capital projects, so it'd be good to work together as a whole organisation rather than just focus on one, not the biggest capital project, but make sure other projects are folded into that as well. But also, obviously, we've got capacity issues, so making sure that it all is achievable.
Yes.
Other than that, yeah,
Right.
I propose the work plan.
You second that? I'll just wait for Steve to come back. Otherwise, I'm not for it.
Yeah.
We seem to be always waiting for Steve.
You asked.
Drink too much coffee, that's a problem.
Right, now we will do it now. That's all right. Have you got any questions on the work plan, Councillor
Well, not as
Sims?
such, but I think as a part of the committee's remit, it's come to my attention over the course of the last few days that there is a issue in the wider community regarding the maintenance of the housing stock. Now, there's always going to be gripes about that, and I just think it might be useful to get a report from Nicola's department on how that's going and outstanding and progress and things, because there doesn't seem to be a place in full council where it fits in nicely. And as a lead member update, it's hopeless really, because it's perhaps a little bit too detailed. So there's just a thought that perhaps we could.
Isn't there a housing maintenance plan?
Oh yes, there is a housing maintenance plan, but I just think it doesn't necessarily come to council all that often. And
I don't think it's ever come to council.
Well, there you go.
So,
and yeah. But I mean, and Nicola's aware of this, and she has put quite a lot of effort into updating it, because previously I think the way I would look at it was treading water or maybe going slightly backwards. And she put quite a lot of resource into sorting it out. And I think it would be quite useful if the population at large became aware of it. And I think the Scrutiny Committee may well be a way to do that. But that's just a thought that perhaps we can look at doing later on.
Yeah, Chairman, sorry, Steve. In the internal audit, there's a line called refurbishment programme. Stock condition survey work awarded to consultant, works commencing November 2018, final report by April 2019, to include a 5 and 30-year business plan.
This is going to kind of full council anyway, that would be useful. But I was just thinking on an ongoing thing above and beyond that, or actually below and underneath it, rather, you know what I mean?
Right. Okay, so any more questions about the work plan? No. Right, could we have a proposer, please, for the work plan? It was Councillor Watt, and it was seconded by Councillor Marcus. So now could we have, yes, vote. Now we'll call it. Thank you very much. That concludes the meeting. Thank you very much. 11:55.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew.
Now that the meeting's concluded,
Right.